Hey everyone, this is Ryan, the host of Coffee People and Coffee Smarter, and I'm encouraging you to check out Roastar Coffee Packaging, found online at roastery.com. They print great-looking coffee bags for a host of your favorite companies that trust Roastar to produce the packages worthy of their specialty coffee beans. Head to roastery.com to learn more about their quick turnaround time, digital printing, and smaller print runs. You can also check out their updated design lab and create an entirely new package in the blink of an eye. In short, Roastar can help you make a great coffee bag. And on roastery.com, you can start with a quote and end with the perfect coffee bag to share your story. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Coffee People podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Woldt. This show is presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging and is part of our Roast West Coast Coffee Network. Go to roastwestcoast.com to find recaps of this show, this podcast, and so much more. On this show, we interview guests who have some sort of connection to the coffee industry. We share their stories of entrepreneurship, motivation, their challenges and inspirations, and today feels more like an innovation day. We're chatting with Andy Kleitsch, the CEO of Atomo Coffee. Atomo has entered the market with a beanless coffee that, according to them, is the most sustainable on the planet. But the question that I have for Andy is, if there aren't any coffee beans, is it still coffee? The answer is forthcoming. But until we get there, be sure to take a quick trip into this podcast's show notes. You'll find links to our newsletter and atomocoffee.com there. You'll also be able to connect with our sponsors. And of course, be sure to like and follow this podcast. It makes a big difference for us and frankly just makes us feel good. We appreciate it. Okay, enough logistics. I need some coffee. Today I brewed up a batch of Servant Coffee's Ambrosia, a single origin Honduras coffee in my Clever dripper. I've been inspired as of late to work my way through the various brewers in my home. Tomorrow I'm planning on using a homemade pour-over device that is basically a V60 clone that I built with a stand of copper pipes. Because what else am I supposed to do in my free time? I hope that wherever you are, you're drinking something interesting too. Really focus on the experience of your coffee today, and keep that in mind while listening to this Coffee People conversation with Andy Kleitsch, CEO of Atomo Coffee.
Well, my name is Andy Kleitsch. I'm the CEO of Atomo Coffee. We're headquartered in Seattle, which we think is the epicenter of coffee in the U.S. And I'm the CEO and I'm the founder, co-founder of Atomo, and started it 5 years ago.
I don't believe you started this off with some fighting words, but do you believe Seattle is still the nexus of coffee in the
Tell
U.S.?
me where else is the nexus of coffee. I haven't found another one yet, although I have to admit, traveling around, there are towns that I think are the best epicenters of coffee. And I will tell you two that are not even in the US. I believe Tokyo is dynamite, and I believe Hong Kong is fantastic. So I would say Seattle, yeah, it still reigns in the US, just from its legacy, heritage, and, just from that aspect.
Atomo is what we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but before we do get too far, I want to learn just a little bit about you. In particular, if you had kind of a first coffee memory, first coffee experience, something that maybe set the seed for this path you're on now.
I think about this a lot, actually. This is the question I ask people is tell me about your first coffee experience, because it's always such a great question. For me, my first coffee memory is my grandmother, she moved here from Norway. She lived 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, right? So this is like dark all winter long. They just drink black coffee. And I just have this memory of my grandma baking at all hours. It could be midnight. She's baking something. She's got a cup of black coffee and she's smoking a cigarette all at the same time, like in the kitchen, you know? And actually, I also have a memory of my mother. There were certain plants in our house that were never watered with water. They were only watered with leftover black coffee.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
she would take her cold black coffee and water these plants with it. And they actually did quite well. There might be something there for our listeners. Maybe there's a hint there,
Yeah.
but yeah, they did great.
I do use a little bit of ground used coffee grounds in my kind of plant fertilizer. I kind of sprinkle it into
Mm.
things here or there. Atomo, I'm going to jump into this because I want people who are just starting the show with us to really make sure they hear what this is. I get these lovely press releases from your company, and I
Yeah.
read the social media and that sort of thing. And I saw this quote that I'm going to read back to you. Atomo is the world's first molecular coffee containing no coffee beans. That kind of stops me right away. And I'm assuming you get this question all the time.
Mm.
One, what does that even mean? What's molecular coffee? What is, are you creating it from nothingness like on a sci fi television show? And
Right.
two, if there's no coffee bean, is it coffee?
Yeah, I mean, what is coffee, right? I think that I'll kind of make a challenging statement. I think people that have been in the coffee industry for a long time, and I'm new to the coffee industry, I've only been in it for 5 years, but I think people that have built their lives around the coffee industry believe that coffee is the bean. And I would challenge that. I don't think that's accurate. I think coffee is an experience, it's a ritual, it's a result, right? Like when you drink coffee, you expect a result, you expect a taste, you expect an experience. Consumers don't think coffee is a bean, they think it is an experience and a result. And so I would like to kind of broaden everyone's horizons right now and say, why are we all stuck in this belief that coffee has to come from a coffee bean? It doesn't. And you ask, what is molecular coffee? How could you make coffee without a coffee bean? Well, the first thing you would do, and this is what we did, we just said, well, what is in coffee? We looked at like the black liquid and said, what is in this liquid? And how would we get this from something else that isn't from a coffee bean?
Oh, that's interesting because it's a phrase that I hear repeated and I've personally used about how coffee is like wine and there's all these different flavor profiles and flavor components and things, but that is reflective of something in the coffee. So you're talking about identifying those things. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, yeah. You identify the attributes, you identify the compounds that are in the coffee that are contributing to the experience, to the mouthfeel, to the taste, to the aroma. And you say, great, where are these things coming from in the coffee bean? Which compounds are they coming from? And then where can we find those in other ingredients that are better
Hmm.
for the planet, that are upcycled, that are things that aren't causing deforestation? And so we really then reverse engineered the compound reactions that happen from a green coffee bean all the way to a roasted coffee bean to an extracted coffee, and we looked at that path, that journey. And I'll tell you the secret that we learned, because when we first started, we were trying to replicate the liquid that was in your cup. That was kind of where we started.
Hmm.
That was a dead end. It was actually going back and replicating the green coffee bean and then taking it through a thermal reaction through a roast and replicating that journey that green coffee bean goes on. That's actually the trick. That's where you get the depth and complexity of character, and you get this layered flavor. That all comes from that thermal reaction and taking that bean, the new beanless bean, through that experience.
Alcohol, non-alcoholic beer is having a moment as well.
Sure.
And the best non-alcoholic beers are not beers that are made without alcohol. They're beers that are brewed like the way they would normally be, and the alcohol is somehow removed. It's kind of how I think about caffeination. But this is kind of the same concept. You can't just skip to the extracted phase. You have to start at the green
Mhm.
phase and work your way through. Coffee is a science project always, from somebody brewing a pour over in their kitchen to, what you're doing on the far end of that. what I'm wondering about this product that you're putting out, the beanless coffee bean, is there still an organic component to it, or is it
Yeah.
all lab created? Because I think that might be something people are wondering.
Oh, it's such a good question, right? When we first launched, we did call it molecular coffee, and I think that got a lot of attention. But it was really misleading in that it not in the fact that we're copying all the compounds in coffee, because we are, not because we're not replicating coffee, because we are. But how it was misleading is that people thought it was a science project. People thought it was just bleeps and bloops and smashing atoms together and a bunch of flavored nonsense, and just they thought it was of science, of Frankenstein. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's how they thought. And in reality, our coffee is the exact opposite. It is all farm grown, natural foods that are whole foods. So in our coffee, in a pound of Atomo, there's like 28 strawberries.
Hmm.
There's 2 potatoes. There's 2 bananas. There's aronia berries. There's guava, lemon, fenugreek, millet. These are ingredients and date pits. So date pits that we upcycle. So what we've done is we've gone to the earth, we've gone to the farmers, we've gone to crops that cause less damage than coffee, no deforestation, smaller footprint, and we're using those ingredients that are widely available, and we're reacting them and combining them and roasting them and doing all these little tricks to get them to taste exactly like coffee and contribute all the compounds. So I think that it's probably something we need to improve upon. Honestly, it's like, we need to really help educate consumers that this isn't something to be afraid of. It's actually whole foods, farm grown foods.
So I don't do a ton of research on a product before I talk to someone because I want to learn it along with the audience. But as I'm sitting here talking to you, there's a farmer's market about to start down the street. I'm
Right.
assuming I can't walk to that farmer's market, collect all these ingredients that you just, rattled off, and somehow create coffee at my home. So what is it like for the consumer? If I were to buy a bag of Atomo coffee beans,
Mm.
either online or wherever they're available, what's my experience like? Is it any different? Do I need different equipment? What's the story?
Yeah, so this was a requirement right from the very beginning when we started the company, was there can be no change to the ritual of coffee. Like, that is one thing that I think we all like, is we all like our coffee ritual. So we said right away, this has to match the ritual. So we decided, right, because from the very beginning, if you think I'm going to reinvent coffee, you could think I'm going to put it in the shape of a pill, or I'm going to put it in an eyedropper, or I'm going to, whatever. You could come up with so many crazy ideas. And we said, we're not going there. We are going to replicate coffee. That means we have to get grounds. We knew that like the core of it would be coffee grounds that could be used in any application. In all of our, R&D over the last 5 years, we found that grounds that work in espresso machines with 9 bars of pressure and the temperature and everything that you experience in that espresso machine act a lot different than coffee grounds that are involved in a pour over. So we know that there's just so many nuances, which makes coffee fascinating, but there's so many nuances in the use case and how you brew. So the goal is always and has always been to replicate one for one the experience that you do today. There's several different products that we have right now that kind of satisfy that. One is an espresso, right? So this is a pure espresso product. So with a partner like Bluestone Lane, where our coffee is available, you can go there and get a pure Atomo espresso. So it's 100% Atomo. If you go to our website today, we have a 50-50 blend. So this is something that as most things are, it was an accident. It was just like a happy accident. We were at a client meeting one day, and they had their coffee there, and we said, "Hey, let's take some of your coffee and blend it with ours and see what happens." And we pulled this shot that was 50-50, and it just kind of blew everybody's minds, because we were like, you can still taste the coffee from that coffee provider. You can still taste their profile, going through, but yet it was bolstered and supported by Atomo in a way that made it really pleasant and fruity. And added some great attributes. And so we realized at that moment, we're like, maybe we're better together. Like maybe this, like we don't actually have to replace coffee. Coffee isn't bad, but it's like if we could work together to create the most sustainable SKU, then we could slowly transition people into a coffee that is great tasting, still contains coffee, but is still better for the planet. And we think that's a really compelling kind of use case for coffee.
I didn't actually realize that they were available as a blend. You said that you're not trying to replace coffee, which is something I hear when I think about products that I think of as coffee adjacent or marketing in the coffee space. Like,
Mm,
I'm not trying to lump you in with these other things like mushroom coffee is having a moment, for example.
sure.
The idea that I get to replicate my current experience is certainly appealing. You've mentioned sustainability and better for the planet. How does that fit in with this company with Atomo?
Yeah.
How is that part of your ethos?
Well, I mean, it was the whole reason to start the company. And so, I started the company thinking I actually didn't have a very good idea on what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that I wanted to do something better for the planet.
You
Spent,
and me both.
yeah, right. Spent, I actually just, so, but I made it a project. I said, I am going to spend however long it takes. I'm going to interview scientists, entrepreneurs, engineers. I'm going to go around to everybody I know and I'm going to ask them this one question, which was, what would you be working on right now if you weren't doing the thing you're doing right now? What's your project that you wish you were working on? And they all have crazy innovative ideas. If you talk to an entrepreneur and you ask them that question, they almost always have an answer that is like, "Oh, I'd be doing this." And so I found one of those really creative guys who said, "You know what? If I wasn't working at this big company right now, I would be trying to reverse engineer coffee and make the perfect cup of coffee." And I was looking for an idea that would be better for the planet. So I did a bunch of research on coffee. I started to understand the impacts of coffee. And I said, wow, this is a candidate. Like this actually could have a really positive impact on the planet, especially over the next 30 years. And so that checked the box for me. And the fact that I love coffee just made it amazing. But let me tell you, like my ethos or like the premise in my brain that I always kind of look at my decision making process of how to scale Atomo and why I'm doing it. And I'm making Atomo and building this company to do something better for the planet. To do something better for the planet, you have to do it at scale, right? Because
Hmm.
the planet needs us to act now. So if I'm going to do something better for the planet and it's small, that is not as effective as doing something better for the planet and make it very, very large. Now, to make something large in coffee, if you're in coffee, you know that there's a lot of small coffee shops. They're doing great work. They're having an impact in their community, but they're probably not having a planetary impact, right? So to do something better in coffee and have a planetary impact, you've got to work with the largest coffee companies in the world. It's just going to be mandatory because they have the distribution, they have the reach, they have the machine in place. And so for me, it's one of the realizations that, I've come to over the last 5 months, 6 months. I'm 5 years into it and finally realizing in the last 5 or 6 months that we need to partner with the largest coffee companies in the world to enable them to help us reach our goal, which is to make the planet a better place. And to work with and to partner with coffee companies, if we attack coffee and say coffee's bad, that's not going to get, no one partners that way. That's not a way to partner, and that's actually not how we feel. Like we love coffee. So our way is to say, hey, let's partner together to create the most sustainable product ever, a
Sure.
blend of coffee and beanless coffee to create this magical experience. So that's been the approach and the reason for like what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
I imagine that it's easier to get a independent or a small coffee roaster, coffee company on board because they might have a shared passion or a similar ethos as you do. If you're
Well,
approaching,
can I
or maybe
let
not.
me interrupt you for that just a
Yeah.
second. There's especially if anyone's listening to this that is a small coffee company or cares about the planet. This is I'm struggling with the dilemma that I've seen happen. I'd love to get your opinion on this.
Sure.
All right, small coffee companies. I would say they tend, or when you look at the ones that are very climate focused, sustainability focused. All right. And there are some great ones, some great examples, right, of coffee companies that are small, that have a great sustainability story. They work with a handful of coffee growers that they've known for a long time. They have they've really built this story around themselves and what they stand for. And they really they've almost insulated themselves in a way. They're like, we're an insulated being, and we operate in a very with ethos. We have this, a driving passion of what we do and why we do it, and we're good people, you know. So it's so, and we everyone applauds them, right? Like, you're doing the right thing, you're trying to do the right thing. But then you look at what's happening with coffee, and especially over the next 30 years, and coffee as a whole. So what's been said by experts way out there beyond me is, half the coffee has to move, right? Where it's moving is most of it's forested. So we're going to see a massive deforestation over the next 30 years to supply coffee. And so what I've seen is it's a weird thing. The young hipster coffee company that loves sustainability, they're almost like, hey, we're doing the right thing, we're not the problem. They're the ones that are most likely to act and do something innovative, but yet they think they've checked the box. They're not at fault.
But on the other side of that, you have a big corporation,
Right.
the evil empire, so to speak,
Right.
if we're speaking in those terms.
Sure.
And they have to look at what you're saying and see the value financially, the money. I mean, I think we all assume that that's the end all be all. And when you're answering to investors or stock market or whatever it might be, that's going to be the big thing. How do you convince someone on that side of it to say, yeah, we also believe that this will be better for us in the long run. Maybe we care about the environment, maybe we don't, but what we do care about is having the ability to make money in 30 years.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, you're right. The larger companies that might not be as fast moving as the small ones when it comes to sustainability, but you're right. Sustainability is going to hit their bottom line. It's going to hit their pocketbook. It's going to hit their supply chain. It's going to make it harder for them to get coffee. In fact, we know it's going to make it harder to get consistently good coffee, right? So at a favorable price for them. So we know that they are facing those kind of future problems, and those are already starting to happen. So the large coffee companies that have reached out to us for a couple of reasons. One is what you just mentioned about supply assurity. They're worried that 30 years from now, there's not going to be enough Arabica. Like, that's a real concern from coffee companies. Another one is the price volatility. They're just like, hey, we would like to find a way to assurity on price. Another one is just really climate claims. So CO2 reduction, like other claims, deforestation claims, things that they've publicly stated that they need to have assistance in finding new creative ways to actually hit those numbers and to fulfill their promises. So that is true. And then there are, kind of the other large coffee companies that just haven't come around to that way of thinking yet.
What have been, forgetting about the money and going back to just this beanless coffee bean, which I admit it breaks my brain a little bit when we say it out loud.
Yeah.
And I'm relatively new in the coffee space as well. I mean, I'm on that same 5-6 year plan where I'm really focused on it. What were the hiccups in getting to a point where you felt like, oh, we have this fun idea and it's exciting and cool and there's a planetary impact? Going from there to something that you would be willing to serve someone and say, trust me, this is coffee and it tastes like coffee.
Wow. How long did that take?
I mean, how long did it take? What stands out from that period of time? Because I can't
Mm,
imagine you just went in the kitchen one day and started whipping things together. I
wow.
got to imagine there were some challenges in place, and how did Atomo address those? And I
Yeah.
also would imagine at the same time as you were dealing with internal challenges to create this product, you were probably dealing with some industry external ones of people going this, fighting you on the concept.
I'll answer those a couple different ways. The media and the consumers have absolutely loved this product from day one. For those of you, listening that have started companies before, and I have as well, there's some companies that just seem to grab the attention and the imagination of consumers more than others. We've all been a part of those companies that weren't that captivating, and I'll tell you, like, this one is one of those that is captivating. So when a news anchor says, we're going to talk about coffee without the bean, almost always the other news anchor says, well, does it have caffeine? I'm going to need that. Like they always want to talk about it. It's so when we launched, a little backstory, when we launched the company, we were in a garage. We started the company in a garage in Seattle, making some prototypes in a garage. And we took the coffee down to the University of Washington. We rolled it up in a cart. We had no permission to be there at all. We just rolled up a cart on campus with some cameras. We started handing out coffee to students and recording it. And seeing, we had Starbucks, their pike roast against our blend. And 2-to-1 students were picking our coffee as their preferred coffee over Starbucks in a blind taste test. So we said, wow, that was cool. We should put this online. We decided to do a Kickstarter campaign. We knew that there's no way we could fund this entire company with Kickstarter, but we thought it'd be a fun way to kind of share the story. So we put together a Kickstarter campaign, put out the video, Atomo beat Starbucks 2-to-1, beanless coffee. And it was just a viral moment. Like it just got picked up globally. And so we had all of this interest, and our premise was we wanted to raise money to build a laboratory and to build a team. And our concept was, I bet if we can put out a press release and a video, we might get investors calling us. That was our hope. Rather than us calling investors, let's see if investors will call us. And it actually worked, like, because of just how 5 years ago, coffee without the bean, pretty revolutionary idea, blowing a lot of people's minds. It still does today. But 5 years ago, it became newsworthy. Investors started calling us, and we were able to quickly secure that first round of funding and then build our laboratory. And it all happened very quick.
Interesting. But then you're in the laboratory. You got to actually make this happen.
Yeah.
How does that process go?
Well, it took us, I would say, between, getting in the lab, we determined that the first thing we had to do was to double down on, like, what is coffee? How do you generate coffee? What ingredients can you use? Where can you find precursors for these compounds? How can you generate the reactions? And just started doing this project, which we called needle in a haystack. We're like, it's a needle in a haystack. There's got to be some ingredients out there that make coffee, and they can generate these compounds. We have to find them. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests and trials. And we discovered a lot. We filed some patents. And about 1.5 years into it, we've had 3 or 4 mistakes, or like just happy mistakes along the way that have been like beneficial for us. Like, one of them was we always brewed coffee warm, right, as like a pour over, and then we put the liquid in the refrigerator. We didn't have time to really taste it or play with it that day, so we put it in the refrigerator, came back the next morning, drank it cold, and we were like, hold on, this is so good cold. Like, it was the best cold brew we ever had. So we were like, we might have to do a cold brew. Like, it just all of a sudden we had this like moment where we were trying to do hot coffee, but this cold brew is so good. I think we have to do cold brew. So we did. We went out, we raised some more money. We built a little tiny cold brew factory where we could just make 1,000 servings a day kind of thing in this factory. We probably did 100,000 cans of cold brew. We got it out there. People loved it. In blind taste tests, we would never even tell people it wasn't conventional coffee. We would just say, try these different cold brews, and ours was always winning against other established cold brews. We have an unfair advantage when it comes to making cold brew. We can dial the formula so it tastes better when it goes through a retort process. So most coffees, when they go in the canning process and they get canned so they can be shelf stable, they get retorted. Retort is like this high intensity heat. and it just affects coffee. It makes coffee, it just really harms it. It harms the flavor, it harms the aroma, it harms everything. And we are able to create a coffee that when you put it through a retort, tastes better. And so that's like an unfair advantage. We can actually create something that tastes magical when it's canned. So we had this fantastic cold brew, but we had not figured out how to make coffee grounds yet. We were doing this cold brew factory in a way that would be really, really hard to scale. And so we said, you know what, we're going to put this on pause for a minute. We are going to go solve grounds. And when we get grounds solved, we can always come back to cold brew and create cold brew in any cold brew factory. And so that was another big kind of moment for us, is when we decided that, really the product that has to be done is grounds, and we need to go solve that so we can go back and then do any application.
Yeah, for sure. I would imagine grounds are what people have the most experience with. Whole bean or ground. Is whole bean, like when I'm thinking of coffee, so I buy whole bean. Is that an option with Atomo?
So, I mean, whole bean has
Or
been a
whole
fantasy.
something?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It has been a fantasy of ours to launch a whole bean, and we've absolutely tried, and I would say that it is on the roadmap. We have some firm ideas on how we're going to do it. We haven't cracked the bean yet on how to do it exactly the way we want. So we're still working on things. So I would say, like, that is absolutely something we want to do.
When I was doing a little reading about you as a person outside of
Mhm.
Atomo, I noticed your current titles are listed as CEO, UW advisor, and adventurer.
Mm.
Where does adventure come into your life?
It's such a fun part of, like, I love getting out in the wilderness, pushing myself and kind of reconnecting with simplicity, with a real simple goal and a real simple environment where you can take away all the electronics and all the distractions. I think we just distract ourselves so much every day. And so to be able to get out in the wilderness in a challenging environment where you get to kind of have that flow state where you can just focus on what's in front of you, but also do it in nature, it's so important. And so over the years, it's really started, not long distance backpacking, like a through hike, which is not 3 months, but it's more like 10 days, where I'll get out and really be able to kind of disconnect and reconnect with myself and with nature. And probably one of the most fun adventures I had was last year. It was called the Race to Alaska, and it's a sailboat race from Seattle to Ketchikan, 700 miles. You cannot have a motor on the boat. You take the motor off, and you hop in a sailboat, and you have to make your way to Alaska. And it was just such a fun, magical experience to be able to kind of push yourself in those ways. So I think that, in fact, there was years ago, I was working at Amazon. I was interviewing this woman, and I'm like, what's your dream vacation? And she said, well, I just did it. I just hiked to the Mount Everest base camp for my honeymoon. And I was like, you're hired. Like, it's like, that's, if you're doing that kind of stuff, pushing yourself in your free time, in your leisure time, if you're kind of pushing yourself to understand your own barriers of where your extent of breaking is. And let me tell you something. I got to talk about this Race to Alaska for a second. I thought that I was going to find my breaking point. And that's what I was actually curious about. That I'm like, I'm going to do this race so I can find my breaking point, so I can see what I'm really made of. And I might not like it, but I want to see what happens when I reach that edge. Well, okay, I didn't reach the edge. It was difficult. I discovered something completely different. I discovered that when you put a team together, the bonds that happen and the shared experience was something that was so great and profound that the trip wasn't at all about trying to break myself. It was about really connecting with others.
Sure, quality time through suffering.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of getting out into the world.
Yeah. Mhm.
How does that relate to being an entrepreneur? You mentioned Amazon. I know you've had a series of businesses and things that you've been involved in. I don't mean to imply that you started Amazon.
Yeah.
That wasn't my
No,
intent
no.
there. Just a stop on the way. How does the exploration of yourself and your limits translate into your life as an entrepreneur?
Mm. I think they're just so related, as in there's a moment, a lot of students, would volunteer when I'm working a ton now. So my volunteering at the UW has gone down a lot. But there was a time when I was volunteering quite a bit there, and the students would ask, when should I leave my corporate job and do my startup? They'd all ask that, I've got this idea, but when should I leave my job and do my startup? And I'm like, well, you leave your job and you do your startup when you can't stop yourself anymore. Like there's a moment where you cannot stop yourself and you have to do it. And I always joke around. I'm like, I know why Kurt Cobain in Nirvana kicked over all of his amplifiers. It's because he couldn't stop himself. He had to do it. And like, that's the way I feel when I get a bug for a startup, when I get a bug for a company. I cannot stop myself. It's like I will not be happy. I will not find fulfillment until I go do this thing. And and I think, how does that relate back to adventuring and kind of pushing yourself? And I think that startups are like, I don't know if anyone else has done a startup and you find that it's so painful that with like a year after you're done with it or 2 years after you're done with it, you kind of forget. It's like having kids, which I've had a couple of those too. And a few years after you've had a kid, you forget, like, it wasn't that bad, was it? Like, maybe we should do it again. And like, for me, it's like you have to like the pain, you have to like the struggle, you have to like why you're doing it, the mission, the why. Like, the one thing that I've been focused so much on lately is the why am I doing this? What's my higher purpose here? What is giving me fulfillment? And when I stay focused on that, then all of the problems that I call the messy middle, all those problems actually dissolve. And I think so much of our lives right now, if someone was thinking that, I want to do a startup and here's what I want to do, it's really easy to get focused on the messy middle. Oh, I've got to incorporate, or I've got to do this, or I've got to do that. And those things do have to get done. But the messy middle is the messy middle for a reason, because there's so many knots and there's so many things that are going on in there. And you could really spend all your time in that messy middle thinking that you're getting somewhere. But what I've always found is that when I take my conversation in my brain up a level and I think like about my purpose and why I want to be here and what I'm trying to achieve, and like really for myself and for the planet, and think about why I'm here, all these reasons, let's just call it big thinking. Then I find that the messy middle almost always takes care of itself. It evaporates, it simplifies, you really start to understand what's the most important thing to do next.
To take your hiking analogy, I would kind of look at that as the middle is stepping off the path into a bog and getting stuck, and the rest of it, the problems are actually the stepping stones. You step from one to the next to get to your destination.
Man, you know what? In my hiking world, I would call the messy middle all the planning that I do beforehand, looking at all the gear. Well, how many ounces do I have in my backpack? Should I do this? Should I do that? What about these shoes or those shoes? You can get stuck there and think you're actually making progress, and then when you finally get on the trail, you've left your car behind and it's a one-way path, like, now you're committed. Now you're in it. Now your head's in the right spot, and it turns out.
Roasting with the Atomo coffee, we used the term roasting earlier. Is it roasting in a traditional sense, like with a coffee roasting machine, or is this something that you guys have developed for this purpose?
We do have a coffee roasting machine. Every bit of coffee that comes through goes through a coffee roasting machine. But we also have a lot of other unique, manufacturing equipment that's food grade food manufacturing equipment. So when you look at our processes, over half of our ingredient in our coffee is upcycled materials, right? So we're taking date pits from Coachella Valley, and those date pits are washed and dried in Coachella and processed down there. We then send them up to Seattle, and you can imagine in our factory in Seattle, in one door comes the date pits and strawberry, fire, all the things that we buy, all the ingredients that go into our coffee come in the door. And they go through a series of steps. And you can kind of almost think of our place like it's a bit of a brewery. It's a bit of a cracker making facility. It's a coffee roaster, and then it has, of course, the grinders and the packaging and everything else that you would expect. But it has a lot of little components in it that you would never see together in one spot. And that's kind of the magic, is taking them through this the amusement center, if you will, in our facility, and creating those experiences.
What is the future of Atomo? Near future, far future?
Well, near future is that we're just so excited to launch this kind of 50-50 blends, right? So to partner with coffee and to show consumers that there's no trade-offs. If you drink Atomo blended with coffee, you have absolutely no trade-offs. And if you drink Atomo pure, no trade-offs as well. But it's like when you blend it, it literally is a mind blower. So all of us could cut our impact on the planet by just doing that, and we would have no trade-off. So that's the biggest thing I'm excited about. Clearly, you can tell I'm excited, is like working with coffee to help us all be better. The dream that I have is that you can wake up every morning and do something good for the planet. And my theory is that if you wake up every morning and do something good for the planet, that you might actually then do something good for the planet at lunch too, or at dinner, or later on. So I like this idea of waking up and doing something good for the planet right away, and that puts you in the right frame of mind for the rest of your day. So for me, like if we could have Atomo have that type of impact, that's what I'm looking for.
When you're out there having an impact, let's say, or you're preparing for the next adventure, and you stop in a traditional coffee shop, which will someday have Atomo coffee on the menu, but maybe today they don't. What is it that you're going to order?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, an Americano, and I'll say small, and they'll say, well, our smallest is 12 ounce. And I'll be like, well, just put 8 ounces in. And they'll say, well, we can't do that. I'm like, no, just don't put as much water in. And they're like, oh, okay. So that is what I always have to do. Now that's the drive-through espresso stand that I'm talking about right there. The nice classy shops get it, but a very kind of short Americano is my favorite.
Is there anything I didn't ask today or that you think is important for people to know about what it is that you're doing before we let you back into this wonderful world of Beanless Coffee adventures?
Well, I think I would just make kind of one last statement around the future of coffee, and that is like most people just don't know that coffee is that it has an impact on the planet and that it actually is in trouble. And so if there's a couple pieces of data I'd love to just share. Like one is if you drink 2 cups of coffee a day, it takes about 20 coffee trees to support your habit. Right? So there's 20 coffee trees out there for you in the world to support your daily habit. And half of those have to move, right? Over the next 30 years. We know that. And so,
And when you say that, just to clarify, you mean they have to move because climate is changing and those places won't be able to sustain coffee farms, yes?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's a story that I can tell kind of about this, which is a trip I took to Peru. I had to find out what is causing deforestation in the Amazon. Is coffee involved in that? I need to see it for myself. I need to understand like what is going on in the coffee industry. So I went down to Peru. I went out to the Amazonas region. I then met a coffee farmer, 3 of us on a motorcycle, went on dirt paths up to a hillside. We climbed for probably 8 hours. They said I was the very first person outside of the village to even go to this coffee farm. And let me tell you, I fell down so many times. It was muddy, it was steep. I get up there, I can hear chainsaws going all the time in the background. This is where I went, was the places where you can still homestead in Peru. You just have to go a little bit further than the last guy and you get your 5 hectares and you can, homestead and you can become a coffee farmer. And what I found was that, first of all, these coffee farmers out there are working they're working so hard. They're living in total poverty. They have maybe a wooden hut with no windows, and they're cooking over wood fires, and they're they're absolutely on the edge of just existing. They then have to clear the land and plant coffee, and then they find that they really can't make enough money to even sustain the dream. The whole dream that they had was that they would be able to get out of poverty, that they would be able to make a life for themselves. And what they're finding is that they can't even hardly get paid what it costs to make this coffee. And so I found that this was the part of the depressing story, was that people were causing damage to the planet to try to make a better life for themselves. They were, removing more forest, which is hurting, of course, the animal life. It's hurting the biodiversity. And they're doing that in the name of providing the world with coffee. And then in many cases, the coffee wasn't even that good, right? So that's kind of the kicker, right? As the road gets closer, what we saw is that those farmers that, oh, the road's closer now. Well, now I can use agrochemicals to try to get a better yield out of my land. Of course, they don't have any safety equipment, so they're poisoning themselves, and then they're poisoning the groundwater. And in the village I was in, the groundwater was actually poisoned now because of all the agrochemicals they put in right outside the village.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a side to coffee that is a bit challenging, and the playbook that we've used for the last 200 years, the coffee playbook, is to take forested lands, remove the trees, put coffee in, and put low wage people in those environments to grow coffee for us so we can enjoy it at a very low price. That has been the playbook. And what we're saying is, like, there's got to be a better way. Like, for the next 100 years, do we want to repeat the same playbook where we just keep tearing down forests and keep relying on low wage workers to provide coffee for us? Like, so for us, we want the coffee farmers that are out there today to grow the best coffee they can. We want them to be successful. We frankly need them to be successful. All of us need them to be successful. But what we don't want is, we just don't want to have another 100 years of the same playbook of people still deforesting more and more land to grow coffee. So in my perfect world, we would stop any coffee farming expansion, and we would find other ways. We would broaden our horizons. We'd look at other ingredients that we can use to create coffee without doing any more harm.
I really appreciate that story, and I see that, and I'm familiar with stories like that. With what you're doing, one of the hiccups that people run into, that I run into, is thinking, how do I really make an impact? And from our conversation today, it sounds like that's a question you ask yourself, and you're seeking a way to do that on a bigger scale. Where do you continually go? Where do you go when you are looking to refill kind of that hope bucket?
Mm,
That this is feasible. It doesn't, maybe today people are saying they're not ready, but we're on a timeline here that isn't sustainable. How do you sustain yourself? Or, in the industry, how do you pass that along to say, hey, here's an idea? I imagine there has to be like an alternator belt in a car. You have to kind of keep running around in the circle, lifting yourself up somehow. How do you manage that?
yeah. I just had to go do that, this last weekend, right? So I had to go get that tune up. So I'll just get really personal here. It's like, I have found that I basically incorporated I call him a spiritual cowboy. All right. I've got an 84-year-old spiritual cowboy in my life. I think having a spiritual program, and I'm not talking about just a standard religious, approach. I'm just saying, like, having a kind of understanding that there are forces in the universe that are greater than myself. All right. And then understanding that I need to, or for me to be satisfied and happy, that I need to make sure that I'm following what it is that I believe is going to bring me satisfaction and personal fulfillment. but at the same time, turning over the outcome because I don't control anything. I don't control. I always look at it to remind myself. I'm like, I don't control Citibank. I don't know why I always say Citibank, but I always say Citi. I don't control Citibank. All right, so I don't control anything, and I have to remind myself that the outcome. A lot of us get tied to outcomes, right? And when we don't get the outcome we look for, we all of a sudden think that we're doing it wrong or we're doing it bad or something. And what I've really focused on a lot is like, put my intentions out there, say it from the heart, be authentically be myself. And those times when I'm trying to adjust who I am to fit someone else, those are times when I have a harder time. I kind of lose my way a little bit, or it feels like you're swimming more upstream. And the times where I feel like I'm really clear with what I want to do, I'm chasing that with all my heart, that's when I feel like all of a sudden you attract the people to you that help you, succeed. And it is just what I've seen happen repeatedly in my life. There was years ago where I was doing a startup that was a mobile payments company. And I realized the banks don't need to make any more money. Why are people, people don't even need to buy any more stuff. People should stop buying so much stuff, frankly. So it's like, what am I doing with my life? And I realized I had no satisfaction in what I was doing. And I didn't really feel like I was even making a difference in the world, at least making a positive difference in the world. And so now that I've kind of gone back to the roots, so for me, you say, how do I keep going? And I have to actually check in with my spiritual guru. I do a lot of reading of different kind of faiths and different practices to kind of gain some stillness. I surrender a lot of things, always kind of surrendering things over. I do a lot of just accepting people and things as how they are. And there are no bad outcomes. Every outcome is good. That is a belief that is it's a hard one to always remember, but it's one that I like to remind myself, is that every outcome is good. I would say there's some principles that I use that I repeat and I'm good at, and there's ones that I'm still learning and I'm still struggling to find and reach and implement. And that's okay. Like for me, I am not expecting my personal insides to be perfect yet. Probably never going to be, right? So let's just own it. Like I'm not perfect, not going to be. And I just want to make sure like I can have some happiness and some fulfillment as I go through my life. And so to answer your question, how do you keep motivated? How do you keep going after it? And I would guess I would summarize all of it by saying being of service. Like the times in my life where I've been of service and saw that I'm going to be of service to this industry, I'm going to be of service to the planet, I'm going to be of service to my employees or anyone. Those are times when I actually find that I'm aligned kind of in the right way to have the quality of life that I'm looking for.
Andy, I really appreciate that thought and you sharing that with us. What a fun conversation. Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to seeing kind of where this project and this company goes and how people respond to it. Frankly, I think is going to be a really interesting, as an observer, as an outsider, and probably chaotic emotionally for you. So I'm here with you, hoping that everything goes well.
Hey, everything is good, remember? So yes.
Okay, a big thank you to Andy for being here today, and some quick key takeaways from the podcast. Is beanless coffee coffee? Is it the physical bean that creates the coffee, or is it the experience? That is the argument being put forth by Andy, and you're going to have to decide for yourself. Someday, in our lifetime, we may be forced to decide, especially if we're unable to slow the impacts of climate change, on coffee farms. How does Atomo create a coffee without the coffee? The answer, at its simplest, is that they analyze coffee to create a database of essential flavor components, and then found those flavors elsewhere, bundled them together to create a product that resembles what we know as ground coffee in appearance, flavor, and experience. But don't let all the sciencey talk fool or frighten you. The ingredients are farm-grown natural foods, whole foods, and upcycled food products like date pits. The motivation for Andy to start a company, any company, was to do something better for the planet. He decided he was going to explore all sorts of industries until he found an opportunity that spoke to him. Redesigning a more sustainable coffee drinking experience was the idea that floored him first, then inspired and motivated him to launch Atomo. But to do something better for the planet, in a timely manner, is a bigger challenge than just convincing the specialty craft community that this product was needed. The production needs to be done at scale, and even though they aren't seeking to change the coffee experience, transitioning some of the demand for traditional coffee is a necessary component in making long-term change, at least according to Andy. In coffee, that means collaboration and/or acceptance by the largest coffee companies in the world to either take on the challenge of beanless coffee or by offering a blend of bean and beanless to the masses. A question that Andy is putting forth to the industry as a whole is, can you participate in coffee sustainably if right now today you aren't taking into account the future impacts of coffee growth, demand, transport, and so on, especially as it'll impact climate change? Are small efforts at sustainability in your cafe or your roaster space a bit like throwing a wiffle ball into the wind, where one gets to feel good about the effort, but the result is that the ball lands behind us? It is a big and scary question, one that might make us feel uncomfortable even, but also perhaps inspire us to be better consumers for having considered it. Finally, Atomo is looking to work with the coffee industry, not against it. You can buy 50/50 blends of their beanless coffee mixed with a roaster's traditional bean. You'll find listings on atomocoffee.com or on Amazon. And just like a bag of coffee, the prices range between $14 and $22. You'll find a lot more from today's show, including a look at some of the ingredients in a beanless coffee, in our newsletter, found on roastwestcoast.com. Thanks again to Andy for being here to share his story, and thanks to you for listening to it. I thank you again for tapping the follow button and offering us some stars in the ratings and telling your friends about this podcast. I'm always telling my friends about Roastar Coffee Packaging, found at roastar.com. They are this podcast's presenting sponsor, as I mentioned up at the top, and they will help you tell the big story of your small business. They've been an incredible support in enabling us to develop this platform where we share the stories of coffee people. And they have a very impressive new design lab for anyone looking to DIY their packaging. I'm a big supporter and believer in working with great graphic designers, but if you're not quite ready for that, the design lab on roastar.com is an excellent place to start. This show is also supported by some great coffee industry partners: Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Maria Coffee, Cape Horn Green Coffee Importers, Crossings Coffee and Hisea Coffee Source, Ignite Coffee Company, Ascend Coffee Roasters, Me and My Uncle Coffee, Craft 42 Roasters, Relative Coffee Company, and Cozy Canine Coffee. I've got some exciting news about a collaboration with Cozy Canine coming up in 2025, and our friends at Maria Coffee have dropped a collaboration roast with artist Sky Walker. He's one of my favorite muralists. You can find that link in the newsletter. I hope that you're getting a chance to relax this week, but if you're doing some last-minute holiday travel and desperate for content, stay tuned. We dropped a second episode today featuring Stacy Linden, the cupping lab manager at Swiss Water Decaf. Find it, well, wherever you just listen to this episode. Seems pretty obvious. This show, the Coffee People Podcast, is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network, and this episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. Wherever you find yourself today, I hope it is with a fine cup of coffee. Thank you for listening to us tell the stories of coffee people. Cheers, everyone. Hey everyone, this is your host Ryan Woldt again, just checking in to let you know that while we don't do a lot of affiliate marketing, we do partner with a couple of companies that we really believe in, namely Baristas and Hydro Flask and Simply Good Coffee Brewers. We recently had a collaboration coffee roast come out with a Relative Coffee Company out of Minneapolis. If you end up going into the podcast notes and clicking the links, if you end up buying something, a little bit of that money comes back to supporting this show. We really appreciate that support and frankly depend on it to keep the lights on a little bit. So if you're looking for something new or you want a great bag of coffee, give it a try. Click the link. We really appreciate you. If you are in the early stages of your coffee journey, we want to support you. Check out the Coffee Smarter Education podcasts. Coffee Smarter is designed to enable coffee drinkers to brew a better cup of coffee at home. And Coffee Smarter Pro covers industry-specific topics for baristas, roasters, shop owners, and aspiring coffee professionals. You'll find both shows on your favorite podcast platforms or on our website at coffeesmarterpodcast.com.